Welcome to Built to Go, a van life podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time it's episode 280, and we're going to take a look at every way to heat your van. There's a lot of them. Many you might not have thought of, and some that'll kill you. We're also going to touch on vapor barriers because they're like a live wire. A product review of something that will light your stove without any fire at all, and a story that starts with wild currants. With an A, not an E. Hello everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining me once again. Episode 280. Well, it's getting a little cold here in Chicago. Actually, that's kind of a lie. We've been unseasonably warm this season, but we know it's coming. We can see it coming. The skies are getting gray, and I remember what it's like being cold in a van. My very first camping in my NV200, I literally just threw some stuff I had laying around in the garage in there and went up to Vermont in the winter. I had nothing there, and I spent the night, a few nights in Vermont actually, with no insulation, and the only heater I had was a butane stove, which didn't work because the butane froze, because, hey, who knew that could happen? Well, anyway, this is why I suggest that you need to just go out there and sleep in your van and make a list of everything that goes wrong, because everything went wrong on that trip. But many, many years have passed now, and I have learned quite a bit about different ways to heat your van. So I'm going to give you a rundown of as many different ways to heat your van as I can come up with. Some of them a little bit off the wall, but bear with me. This list is in no particular order, except that I'm going to start with diesel heaters because for most people, this is going to be the best solution for heat. These are little units that sip diesel fuel, and it's a metal chamber, and there's a glow plug in there that burns the diesel fuel, and then air is blown over this ignition chamber, and heat comes into the van, and it's a nice dry heat. And it has holes that go outside the van, typically 2, sometimes 1, depending on how you do it. One of those holes is to get fresh air into the combustion chamber. That air never comes into your van. It just goes into the combustion chamber and then burn and then let off as exhaust. And that's your second hole. And that's the most important part because that exhaust can never for even a second be in your van. And you need a tank for diesel. And if you're driving a diesel vehicle, you can actually hook up the big tank that you're driving with to the diesel heater. And that works fine. That's what I did in my late Sprinter. It's wonderful. You set the temperature and, well, you don't set the temperature, you set the hertz. We won't get into too many weeds here, but just know that these things work great. Their big drawback is that they're a little bit difficult to install. There's a lot of parts, you need to drill holes, and you have to kind of understand how you're doing it. And often the instructions are in this kind of fake English that's translated from Chinese if you get one of the cheap Chinese diesel heaters, which can cost as little as $100, even less. Or if you want to get quote-unquote the real ones, a Webasto or an S-Bar, those can run you about $1,200. They are definitely better quality, but you have to do the math there. Is it better to have 12 diesel heaters or one Webasto? Most people agree that these are the best way to heat, but there are some cons. You have to have diesel fuel, right? So if you're driving a gasoline van, you have to have a tank filled with diesel somewhere, and they usually come with one. Then you have the risk of spilling diesel in your van, and sometimes if the seals aren't tight, they'll smell like diesel, and that's no good. So you do have some things to overcome there, but most of the time, I'm going to recommend a diesel heater. And diesel heaters have replaced what was and still is very common in RVs, the propane heater. Now there's 2 different kinds of propane heaters. This first one we're going to talk about is the traditional furnace propane heater, which is very similar to what people have in their homes when they're burning natural gas. All this is a big flame. That's it. It heats up a chamber and air is blown over that chamber. It, like the diesel heater, also has an exhaust outside, and most RVs that have heaters will have these. The cons of these are they need a big hole on the outside. It goes usually through the side rather than through the bottom. And in fact, I've never seen one go through the bottom. You have more flexibility with your exhaust with a diesel heater. But they're expensive and they take up a lot of space. These things are generally pretty big, and you need to have propane. Now, if you already have propane in your rig, that's not that big of a deal, but a lot of people are getting away from having propane, and so this isn't a good solution. I don't see too many people putting these in vans that they're building out, but if they bought a van from an RV maker, it may very well have a propane heater. I have one in my Airstream, there's a big one in the Winnebago, and there is also one in my truck camper. And they work fine. They're a perfectly good solution, but it does have those cons. Let's talk about buddy heaters and Olympian heaters and those. Those are called catalytic heaters. It's a different chemical reaction than straight up burning. And because of that, they don't give off combustion gases, at least not in the same way. And this is controversial, but depending on who you talk to, the amount of combustion gases they do give off is safe enough for indoor use. Now, you will find warnings about this, not to do this. This is, again, a contested topic. However, there are a lot of people using Mr. Heater Buddies and Camco Olympians in their rigs and even in tents with no problem. The way these work is the gas is dispersed through a blanket that's embedded with metals like platinum and such, and the propane is catalyzed into heat, which is a different chemical process than burning. And they give off a radiant heat. So it takes a while for these things to heat up your rig. I have one installed in my truck cap right now. And while it will heat it up in there, it takes a good half hour. The good thing is that it uses not very much fuel compared to other types of heat. And it's silent, or very nearly silent. And it's simple because it's portable. You can pick it up and move it. They typically run off those green cans that I hate, or you can get an adapter and run it off of a bigger tank, which is what I'm doing. These things I consider temporary. I know a lot of people use them, but they end up being very expensive over time. Those green cans of propane are ridiculously expensive now. Also, they need some maintenance that's not obvious. There are contaminants in propane and any kind of gas that you use like that, even natural gas. And it builds up over time, and you actually should have a filter on there that kind of captures this stuff. And a lot of people forget about that, and then they find halfway into the season their unit doesn't work anymore. So a lot of people see these as an easy solution for heating your van. Just grab one of these, all set. And if you're camping out maybe 1 or 2 cold nights a year, that might be fine. But if you're doing winter camping or cold weather camping a lot, I don't really think these are a great solution. And to use them properly, you do need to open a vent somewhere. And if you follow the directions, that vent's pretty big. So you're going to be letting out as much heat as you're producing. So yeah, they can be okay, but I consider them temporary or supplemental, and you should use them with caution. Next on my list, which is, again, arbitrary, kerosene heaters. Now, if you're from a rural part of the country, you might still find somebody who has a kerosene heater in their home. These are fairly large, round devices often, and they're just a big candle, really, or a big lamp, if you want to look at it that way. There's a wick, and it burns the kerosene, and sometimes air blows over it. Let me just state flat out, this is a bad option for vans. Everything else beats this. You might have an old one, and you're tempted to use it, but there's no way to vent the gases from this other than opening a hole in your van, like opening your max air vent or whatever, and a lot of your heat's going to escape with that. The liquid can spill. They do give off fumes. I don't recommend them, and let's just leave it like that. Kerosene heaters, yes, they're a thing, but I don't recommend them for vans at all. And on that same note, Sterno canned fuel, jellied alcohol that you would use for chafing dishes and such. I have used these, and I have seen people use them. They don't give off very much heat. But what they are is compact and easy, and they're kind of a take the chill off the morning kind of thing. But the risk of these is that you have an open flame in your vehicle. That's using oxygen, and it's giving off gases. Now, burning alcohol doesn't give off as much terrible stuff as many of the other things we're talking about, but it still does. So you still need to have some ventilation, and you're absolutely going to want to have a carbon dioxide and smoke detector for anything, ever. We're going to state that blanketly. And you can't control the heat very well. I mean, you can kind of put the cover over it a little bit. So, it's not a bad idea to have a can of Sterno in your rig as kind of an emergency cooking or potentially emergency heating tool, but it is definitely not something you're going to use long term, and it does have some danger. The only time I've ever had a fire in any of my rigs was because I kicked over a Sterno can. So I am leery of the things. But, if it's an emergency, you can go to any grocery store and get Sterno, and you might be able to stay warm through the night, but this is an extreme case. Stovetop heating. Now, Bob Wells famously talked about this. He has his Coleman gas stove, an old camping stove, a fairly big one. He hooks it up to his propane tank, and when he wants to heat his rig at night, he just cranks that thing up. And he will always say, this will kill you. His stove is magic, because that is the message that is given from doing this, and I'm going to give the same message. This is not safe. These cooktop devices are not meant to be used that long. They're meant to heat something up and then be shut off. They give off all kinds of combustion gases, and in most cases, let's say you have an RV and you have a propane stove and you're going to cook a can of beans. Well, if you read the directions, you're supposed to open a window when you do this. It's even written on the wall of my Winnebago. You crack the window open, you cook your beans, and then you close the window and you're fine. That is not heating. That is not a heating situation. But people do it and they get away with it, and it's risky, but you have to weigh how much the reward of simplicity is worth the risk. I do have one of those stovetop heaters. It looks like a can, and it has a piece of metal inside that heats up. So you put it on top of the burner, light the burner, and the inside heat up, and it gives off a nice radiant heat. I have used that occasionally under supervision to take the chill off the morning, but I would never ever use it if I were sleeping or anything like that. So stovetop heating, I'm going to classify that as emergency heating. I don't think it's a good long-term solution. And neither is running your engine. And I know people do this. They will, go sleep in the back of their car or van and just leave the engine running. I mean, why not? It's this big engine. It's giving off heat. What's the problem? Well, there's a lot of problems. It's not good for your vehicle, number one. It is an expensive way to provide heat. And just having a vehicle running all night long while you're sleeping is having an unattended vehicle. If anything goes wrong, you're asleep and you can't handle it. It also attracts attention. It's a really bad idea. Is it better than dying? Yes. If you're in an emergency situation, sure, you should consider that. But you do want to crack the window a little bit, because vehicle exhaust, when the vehicle is idling, depending on conditions, can pool under the vehicle and actually get into the vehicle. And that can be very dangerous. Don't run your engine for heat. However, it is better than dying. Electric heaters. Aha! You might be surprised about what I say on this one. Technology Connections, great YouTube channel. Alex pointed out a very basic fact, that all these plug-in electric heaters, and we're basically talking about the U.S. here, draw 1,500 to 1,800 watts. A few of them are 1,800. Most of them are 1,500 watts. It doesn't matter how big it is. The actual thing only gives off that much heat, and all the rest is marketing. I have a little one right next to me now in my studio here. It's a little tiny thing, and it has 3 settings, just fan, low, and high, and you'll find that most of them have that. I've also had a giant one that was filled with oil, and it only had 2 settings, low and high, because there's no fan. But they both gave off the same amount of heat. The oil-filled ones give off the heat in a different way. They give it off radiantly, and some people find that more comfortable. You don't have the big temperature swings like you do with a forced air heater. But other than that, they're all the same. So if you were to use one of these, you should pick convenience and safety. That's where you should look. Don't just get the bigger one because you think it's going to give off more heat. That isn't how it works. However, these things draw 1,500 watts. They draw a lot of power. That's a ton of wattage, and it'll drain your battery very, very quickly. So if you're running off of batteries, these things generally aren't a solution for anything more than a few minutes. However, if you're at a campground and you're plugged in, these are often the best way to heat your rig. In my scamp, when I went to Aurora, Nebraska, the best free campground in the country, there's free electricity, and all night long I ran a space heater there, and I was completely toasty warm with a good level of safety. These don't require any ventilation. It's a dry heat, and if you accidentally kick over the heater, which, if you put it somewhere proper, that won't happen, there's a safety switch that shuts it off. There is one caveat here. Because they draw a lot of power, they put a lot of stress on whatever you're plugging it into. And there's a rule that you should never run an appliance that draws more than 80% of the rated capacity of the circuit for a very long time. So if you're going to use a drill or something and it's right near 100%, that's okay. But if a heater, let's say it's doing 95% of what the circuit can handle, for a long, long period of time, that will actually start melting things. So you do have to watch for that. Don't use extension cords. I know that in some cases you have no choice, you're in a camper, but make them as short and as thick as possible. Check on them to see if there's heat coming off of the cords. Feel things, feel how warm they are. Be prudent. But these things actually can be a very, very effective way to heat your van if, and it's a very big if, you have access to shore power. Okay, here's one we don't talk about very much, heat pumps. In my Airstream, I have a heat pump, and it's the air conditioner, right? So the air conditioner on the roof is a heat pump type, and a heat pump is just a reversible air conditioner. You can think of it that way. You can have the cold air blow inside your van, or you can have it blow outside your van. It's basically moving heat from one side of the equation to the other. And yeah, you can get these for your van. The unit that's on my Airstream would absolutely fit on most vans. They work. It'll blow hot air or cold air, so long as it's above 50 degrees. They stop working at about 40 degrees. So these aren't for winter camping. They're more like, hey, it's cold out, let's put on the heat for a little bit kind of camping. My problem has been that it draws so much power that I don't know that it's any better than a heat strip, which is the other way to do this, which would be just a regular electric heater. I don't really see the advantage. Now, my understanding is that the mini splits, which are popular with some schoolies especially, they're much more efficient and they can use the heat pump effectively. What's nice about this option is that it's super convenient. You have one unit that heats and cools. And if you have shore power, which you're going to need for the air conditioner anyway, you can just reverse it to heat and you don't have to think about anything. They're expensive, they're a little difficult to install, but if you're doing a schoolie type of thing, you should at least look at that as an option. I still think you're going to end up with the space heaters though. Now, electric blankets and heated mattress pads. This is a real secret of van life. These things actually do work because you're not heating up the van, you're heating up you. And that's all you need to heat up at night, if you think about it. People have this idea that because they've lived in homes where every place in the house has been the same temperature, that's how it has to be in your van. But it doesn't. As long as you keep the inside of the van above freezing, you can just make yourself comfortable sleeping under really warm sleeping bags, which I don't have on my list, but yes, you should have a really warm sleeping bag. But even a modest electric blanket will really, really add a lot of heat to that equation. So I have a 12-volt electric blanket. It is not full size. It does not cover my whole body because it's not meant to. And what I do is I get into bed or my sleeping bag or whatever, and I will put this on top of me. And sometimes I'll put a blanket over it, and sometimes I won't. It depends. And it runs off my little power banks, my 500-watt power banks, and it will last all night. In fact, I've used this outside many times. So that is an option. If you do look for a 12-volt electric blanket, find one that's washable. A lot of them aren't washable. You're probably going to want the washable one. Yes, you can use a 110-volt electric blanket, but they do draw more power, and then you need to run the inverter, and it's not as efficient. But yes, they will also work. The advantage of the 110-volt electric blankets is that they're usually full size, meaning they're just a blanket when they're not on. Heated mattress pads, same thing. I think almost every one of those I've seen is 110 volts, but you can actually sleep on a 12-volt heated blanket. Make sure you keep up on these things. If the wires get pinched, they can burn. So these need to be treated carefully. They're fragile. Make sure you check them a lot. But it's a very inexpensive way to stay warm at night. An even less expensive way to stay warm at night, and I've done this many, many times, is the hot water bottle. Everybody should have a hot water bottle, and it doesn't have to be one of those traditional rubber hot water bottles that you can get from Walgreens or whatever. It can just be any bottle filled with hot water. Water absorbs a lot of heat, and it takes a long time for it to get out. So if you're on a night where it's just a bit cold and your feet are cold at the bottom of your sleeping bag, take an old Coke bottle or whatever and add hot water to it, and not boiling water. Boiling water is a bit too hot, but close to boiling. Add it in there, and then just throw it in the bottom of your sleeping bag, and your feet will be warm all night long. It's amazing how long it takes for all that heat to disperse. And most people recommend you wrap it in a towel, because when you first put it in there, it's going to be so hot, it's too hot to touch. And of course, the liquid doesn't have to be water. You could make soup or, well, many of us have bottles in our vans for another reason, and sometimes they get warm in the middle of the night, and Yeah, just make sure that cap is screwed on there really tight. On that same note, there are those hot gloves or those heating pads, very popular with skiers. Some of them go in your boots, some of them in your pockets to heat your hands. Hot hands, I think there's actually the name of them. These are basically, well, they're iron filings that when you expose them to oxygen, they quote-unquote burn. They oxidize, but they give off heat when they do this, and they give off heat slowly. And one of them can last as long as 8 hours. I have some of them in a drawer that I will pull out on nights when it's cold, and I will throw one of those in my sleeping bag. I typically use two. I put one down by my feet, and then I have another one that I kind of treat like a teddy bear. During the night, I just move it around to where I want it. And it's just a comforting warmth, and it is enough that your sleeping bag will retain that heat, and you'll feel comfortable. Then there are dogs. Yes, folks, dogs are heaters. Dogs give off something like 300 BTUs, depending on the size of the dog. That's not a lot of heat. But, hey, if you've ever snuggled up with a dog in bed, you know that they're pretty hot. They can keep you warm, too. So, heck, if you've got dogs, get comfortable sharing the bed with them, and they'll help keep you warm. The cons of dogs, well, yeah, if you have a dog, you know. Wood stoves. That's an interesting one. So, of all the van lifers I pay any attention to, Foresty Forest is the one who uses the wood stove more extensively. He has a very small, I think it's a Cubic brand or Cubic Mini wood stove in his Chevy van, and he has it installed with a removable chimney. So when he stops, he puts the chimney on, and that's basically how he heats his van. And it works fine, and he can cook on it too. It's a dry heat. However, he's an extreme case. He is very, very remote in the camping he does, and he is gone for a long time. So the advantage for him for having this stove is that the fuel is already there. He doesn't have to worry about running out of propane or electricity. He's using the fuel he finds where he's camping. That's the big advantage to these wood stoves. The disadvantages are pretty high, though. They can be pretty expensive. They take up a lot of space because you can't put anything near them. And some of that smoke smell is going to be in your van. If you have a wood burning anything in your van's going to smell like that. Now, it's not a horrible smell, but just know that everything you own is going to smell like smoke. And then, of course, there's the problem of he has to go set up the chimney. And what if you set a rip-roaring fire in that thing and then, oh no, you have to go get milk? Well, you can't just kind of drive with a fire going in the back of your van. So it does require some planning. Also, they burn quickly. You have to keep adding wood to them. I don't think you're going to get through the night unless you're, using some of these other techniques on one load of wood, because the fireboxes are little tiny things. But if you have a schoolie, you have a lot of space, if you're always out in the wilderness where there's lots of wood, yeah, these things can make some sense. Hydronic heaters. These are heaters that use antifreeze or coolant to heat your rig. Now, these aren't really a type of heater because you can do this in a bunch of different ways. There are some RVs now that don't have forced air heat. They have antifreeze that's heated and runs through the floors. That's technically what hydronic heating is. But what I'm talking about here specifically is a calorifier. This is a way to take engine heat and run it through your rig. And my big old Wander Lodge that I had years ago had this, that I had a thermostat in the back of the rig, and as I drove, it would heat the air in the back with liquid that was running through the floorboards, rather than sending it to the radiator up front. Your engine produces a lot of waste heat. This thing basically takes that waste heat and heats your rig with it. And it worked great. It also did the hot water. In fact, in that rig, I always had hot water. I never had to think about it ever. The water was just always hot. Now, these systems are expensive, and it is a difficult thing to retrofit, so this would be something you would want to do immediately as you were building out your van. And you've got problems of leaks and such. But if you have space and money and time and the skill, I'm a big fan of these hydronic heaters. However, they're really only useful if you're going to be driving. So if you're driving and stopping for the night and driving and stopping for the night, these things are great. But if you're going to camp out for 2 weeks, no, you got to find another way to heat the liquid. And some of them have propane units that will heat the liquid as well. But, that's getting more and more complicated. Whew. All right. And that's what I've got for ways that you can make heat in your van. I didn't talk about insulation, and I'm not going to talk about insulation. But But some caveats for all of that. Like I said, you have to have a smoke detector. You have carbon monoxide detector. An explosive gas detector is also a very good idea if you have propane or butane. And you're going to want to ventilate. Or you can just go south. That's the other option too. Say, you know what, Minnesota, you're beautiful, but it's November and Arizona's looking pretty good right now. That is an option a lot of people have. Thanks to Terry and all the donors who give every month. Because of you, there are no ads in this podcast because you followed the shining path and visited buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And you bought me some gallons. I am very much appreciative. I hate ads. And now we have no ads. And this brief one will stop right after this. If you would like to help support the podcast, you too can visit buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go and buy a gallon of whatever liquid you would like. Heck, it doesn't even have to be liquid. I will thank you. Cheers. Tech Talk. I am not touching insulation, but I'm going to touch another controversial topic, vapor barriers. This is such a crazy topic. People go just wild if anybody disagrees with them on this. What is a vapor barrier? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a barrier to vapor. And all homes that have been built in the last 30, 40 years or so have these. And the most common one you see is Tyvek. If you've ever driven by a new home construction site and you see that a house is all white and the word Tyvek is written all over it or the name of a store or something, that is vapor barrier. And the idea is that it prevents moisture from the outside of getting into the wood of the home. That's basically what it's for, is to protect the wood from moisture. And cars have these too in some cases. Often if you remove the molding from a door, the door card they call it, there'll be plastic behind there. That plastic is the vapor barrier. It's to keep water from getting inside or even inside the door, which is how doors rust. Water gets in there and sits and it rusts out. And so we know we have problems with moisture in vans. Should you put a vapor barrier in your van? And depending on who you talk to, the answer is either absolutely, it's dead obvious, you absolutely must have a vapor barrier, or you do not want a vapor barrier under any circumstances because it'll make things much worse. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is a little tricky. If you could apply a perfect vapor barrier in your van, you would keep whatever insulation you have in your walls completely dry, and that would be a good thing. However, perfection doesn't exist. So imagine you do your best to put up a vapor barrier, and then you are camping in some really humid conditions. Some moisture is going to get past whatever holes are in that vapor barrier, and they're there. And that moisture will get in there and get trapped. And over time, more and more and more moisture is going to build up in there because it can't go anywhere. It's trapped behind the vapor barrier. And then you have problems. Then you start getting mold and such. So, what should you do? Well, my answer to this, and sure, some people are going to disagree with this, but my answer to this is, well, what's easier? If you have a situation where you've got the pros and cons are fairly equal, and you know that there are tons and tons of vans out there without vapor barriers that are doing just fine, including nearly every RV ever made, why go through the effort and expense of trying to put in a vapor barrier? I am anti-vapor barrier. I don't think you should bother putting vapor barrier in your van because, as many have pointed out, you already have a vapor barrier. It's called the metal of your van. Technically, that metal is the vapor barrier. It keeps the moisture from outside from getting into your van. Adding another layer after your insulation just creates a situation where your insulation can get wet and then hold the moisture. If you just put insulation up, and it's a proper type of insulation, it may get wet. It may absorb moisture. But as soon as the inside of your van dries out, it's going to release that moisture and it's going to evaporate. And so the secret is, and this is actually the secret of insulation too, it's not about the vapor barrier. It's not about the insulation. It's about the ventilation and your ability to control that. I think it would be a much better investment to install another vent that's reversible, has temperature control, whatever, instead of wasting time putting up vapor barrier because it is frustrating. It's like worse than putting up wallpaper. My 2 cents, other people have their 2 cents. In fact, we've got a whole big jar of pennies here, and they're kind of useless. Product review. I had a weird situation, and I think Hal will remember if he's listening. I was in Colorado doing the Star Stair thing, and I was with the truck camper. And the truck camper has your traditional RV propane stove that you have to light with a match or a lighter or whatever. And I had bought a bunch of those long butane lighters just for this purpose. You know, in the Airstream, there's a sparker, and in my van, I had actually, there was a sparker in my van too. They automatically lit. My portable butane stove automatically lights. You just turn the knob and a spark happens and it lights. But this was old-fashioned. All right, fine. The Winnebago has a gas pilot light, which I don't use. But when I got there, my lighters wouldn't light. It would make a spark, but it wouldn't light. And it was very odd. And I took it outside and showed the people from Colorado who are used to this altitude, which was about 7,700 feet, and I think that's what the issue was. And they eventually got it to light, but it wasn't the same. Back in Illinois, I just click it once and there's a nice flame. It was able to produce a weak flame, but boy, you had to click it a lot. But none of them had heard of this phenomenon of lighters not working at high altitude. So I'm not exactly sure if I got a bad batch of lighters or what, but I couldn't light my stove. I had 10 matches that I found, and that was all I had to light the stove. And I was actually in a situation where I was going to have to find some flint in the field or something to be able to light my stove. And so because of that, I bought this product that is going to live in that truck camper from now on. And it's just a little igniter. And I haven't tried it at high altitude yet, but I can't imagine it wouldn't work. This is just a tube with a button on the end. And when you press the button, a big spark comes out. That's it. That's all it is. It's for lighting stoves of all kinds. What's nice about it is it can't run out, at least not reasonably. It's probably good for 10,000 uses or something. If it gets wet, it's fine. If it's windy, it has more chance of lighting things. It's actually just better than any other way to light your stove, but it's really not good for lighting a cigarette or anything like that. You're not going to use this on a campfire. It's for lighting stoves. And they're cheap. And I bought a couple, and I'm like, yeah, I should just throw this in my rig. And I'm actually going to keep one with me all the time now because it's important to be able to light your fuel, to be able to cook. And it hadn't dawned on me that matches are finite and fragile, and sometimes lighters don't work. So yeah, I'm always going to have one of these. It's just a simple little thing. Comes with a little cord so you can hang it off of something. And it's $6.59 for 2. You get 2 of them for $6.59. So this is a great little stocking stuffer idea or whatever, or just a good thing to have in your van. Throw it in a drawer, hang it on a peg, and I'll bet that even if you have other ways to light your stove or whatever, you will find this thing coming in handy at some point. So if you're traveling far from civilization, being able to light things on fire is important, and well, this thing can help regardless of whatever happens, and it's nearly fail-proof, unlike lighters and matches. Tales from the road. So I am 42,000 words into my 50,000 word challenge for my book on the auroras this month. And, what I have found in a lot of the auroras, as I mentioned last week, is pretty dark, right? So last week I gave you one kind of interesting thing about all the auroras, but I had to take a break, and I had to just get out of the auroras for a while. And I'm currently writing a section about not Aurora, Nevada, but my trip from Aurora, Utah to Aurora, Nevada, which was more eventful than I would have guessed, given that there is nothing in between Aurora, Utah, and Aurora, Nevada. If you look at a map, I mean, there's 6 people. No, it's not quite like that, but this is the big empty space in the country. If you look at any map of where are the McDonald's, or where are their gas stations, or who voted whatever, there's this big empty gap in the western half and in the middle, and that's what I was crossing. Aurora, Nevada is on one side, and Aurora, Utah is on the other side, or even a little bit deeper into it. I figured it would just be big, lonely roads. Route 50 is a big part of it, the loneliest road in America. But I did end up having a lot of interesting experiences. And I'm going to tell you one now that isn't going to be in the book, and I kind of want to share their story. So the way you get to Aurora, Nevada is you go to Hawthorne, And when you leave Aurora, Utah, you end up in Delta, Utah. You go past Scipio and you end up in Delta, Utah. So in between Delta and Hawthorne, you basically will take Route 50 west, but then you'll get on Route 6. This is US Route 6. Another one of these famous storied roads. This is the main road on Cape Cod, and yet it's also in the desert. Now, Route 6 out in this part looks just like Route 50. It is completely desolate and empty. And gas stations are few and far between. And there's this one stretch, 100, 200 miles long maybe, where there's really nothing. But there's one little dot on the map at a place where there's a crossroads called Currant. Currant, Currant, Nevada. And I'm going to guess not too many folks have been there. I bet Wonder Hussey's been there. I mean, if you're exploring the Nevada desert, you've probably been there. But if you're traveling through Nevada, there's not much reason to go through. But I did, and what I found there was kind of interesting. There was a bar and restaurant and gas station and a motel. And when you look at the map and you look where Currant is, that makes perfect sense. This is the perfect watering hole oasis stop. In fact, there was a sign at the gas station in Currant that said, next gas 118 miles. So they could have charged whatever they wanted for gas there and done well. If people drove there, which I just said they don't. And the place was a ghost town. But it was a modern ghost town, so it was kind of fascinating. All those things I just mentioned were abandoned, but they were kind of abandoned just, it looked like people walked away one day. The parking lot was all filled with grass. Some of the windows were broken, but they'd been boarded up, and then others were broken and not boarded up. A couple of the doors to the motel rooms were open, and I could see inside and see that there were still beds in there. And I figured, what the heck? I'm in the middle of the desert. I need a break. And no, there was no getting gas. There was no gas there. But I wandered around and took a few pictures. And it was kind of weird. It was very post-apocalypse kind of looking. The bar and restaurant were really nice at one time. I could see through the windows that there was a big stone fireplace and giant wagon wheels, very Western decor, and a big, long, carved wooden bar. And then I could see there was a buffet at one time. And this was a happening place. This looked like a really cool place to stop. There was a coin-op video game. It was an NBA video game that I guessed was from the 80s maybe, or the 90s, but it was just sitting in the floor. So this place, vandals had been in here. There were plastic coffee cup lids all over the place. People had gone in there, but there wasn't much graffiti, and things weren't just smashed completely, which told me that very few people had bothered to go in here. Now, I've looked on YouTube, and you can actually look on YouTube too, and you'll find these urban explorer types have gone in there, and now it's a lot more damage than when I saw it in 2019. But it was a nice little encapsulated vision of what happens when people stop caring about a place. There was one section where there were booths, very old Western kind of wooden booths, and there was green carpet, like bright green carpet over there. And I was like, well, that's an odd thing to have in a restaurant. It was kind of far from where I was, so I walked around the corner to get a better look, and it wasn't carpet. It was plants. Plants had grown into the floor. And I was like, well, there's no soil in there. How does that work? Well, because of the way the window was situated, light streamed in there for much of it. It was a southern window, so it got light going through the glass. That's what the plants were after. But no soil, well, it didn't matter because it was a vine. The vine was in the soil outside of the restaurant, but it had crawled through the window and then spread enough that it actually looked like a carpet. It was pretty darn cool. But this is the big question. Who builds all this and literally just walks away from it one day? I mean, wouldn't you sell the video game at least, sell the furniture? Well, because of the magic of AI and newspapers.com and all the research tools we have now, I was able to find out what happened. There's always been stuff there. Currant, Nevada has actually always been a place. There's been a whole bunch of different mines. There were tungsten mines and a gold mine and a uranium mine, although that was associated with a big fraud. But there's always been people there, and the reason is more than the mines, it's because there's water there. In fact, it's called Currant because wild currants grew there up on a creek that came down in the mountains. I mean, there have always been people there as long as there have been people in this country, but there have been Europeans there since, the 1800s, early 1800s, and there are still people living there. At one time, Route 6 was much more busy, and this way stop, somebody thought it would be profitable. So it was the Sears, CYR, couple moved there. Apparently she had money from the oil industry. She's from San Bernardino, California, and they built out this whole place, and they made the fancy bar and put in the hotels, which the locals called cabins, but they're motel rooms. And then they put in an orchard, and actually across the street from them there was another well-established orchard that grew cantaloupes and such, which cantaloupes grow really well in the desert as long as you have water. And they would truck them up to Ely, 100-something miles away, and sell them there. Anyway, there was this whole big, long history, and I actually had to stop researching it because it was going to take way too long. But what happened is Mrs. Sear died, and the husband no longer had interest in the place, so he sold it. And then several different owners, there's all kinds of problems, but the last guy who had it was associated with the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas somehow, but he had a gambling problem. And he basically couldn't pay his bills. And the biggest bill he couldn't pay was gasoline. And that's a tricky one, right? Because if you own a gas station, generally you have to pay for the gas up front. It depends on what kind of contract you have. But a small independent dealer will just basically have to pay for the gasoline at wholesale and then sell it at retail. But that requires a big outlay of cash, and he never had that. And they gave him some gas on credit for a little bit because they wanted to maintain the contract, but eventually they just stopped. And then not having gas there, the number of people who stopped plummeted because nobody was driving to Currant for a meal at the bar. Those were there to support the people who spent the night, and those people stopped there to get gas primarily, and that was gone. And all the mining activity ceased, and basically this guy, Gustafson his name was, went to prison, and the place just sat. And I don't know if anybody owns it now. I don't know if the state's taken it over, but it is just sitting there rotting. And looking at some imagery I found from 2025, it's mostly still there, but I can see the roof has been compromised in the motel unit, and that's really the beginning of the end. Once there's a hole in the roof, everything's going to go very quickly. So that's one of the things I found that I didn't expect to find, and it was an interesting moment of understanding what happens. The moment you shut that door for the last time, decay starts, and if you don't keep up on it, it's going to take over. But it's a happy time for that vine. I tell you, that vine's pretty darn pleased in there. So, heck, I will make this also a place to visit. If you're exploring Nevada, this area is rich in stuff to see. There are campsites way up in the mountains here. There's lots of hiking, and it's surprisingly green because there is water here. In fact, if you look at an aerial view of the area, you'll see lots of farms. Those big green circles you see from airplanes, that's what they have here. They have underground water that they pump up and they can irrigate. And because of the intensity of the sun, they can grow certain crops better than they can in other places in the country. So anyway, Currant, Nevada. Resource recommendation. I've talked about this before, but I think we're heading into a fairly hungry winter for a lot of people, so I want to mention this again. You've heard of little free libraries. Well, there are also little free pantries, and they're also called blessing boxes. Often the ones sponsored by churches are called blessing boxes. They're just what they sound like. They are boxes by a building or by the side of the road, whatever, that are filled with food. And you come and take what you need. You can put in what you don't need. And I think these have a unique place for van lifers because there are people living in vans who have food insecurity, and these might be enough to get them right over the edge. There is a map of these online where you can find them. And it's basically littlefreepantry.org. I'll have a link in the show notes. But the other use of these for people doing van life on a temporary basis like I do is, after a 2-week trip, I often have food left over. I might have a few cans of something, and, well, why not put them in the box, You have an abundance of food sometimes, and let's say winter's coming and you want to get the food out of your van. Why not put it in one of these boxes, and maybe this will make all the difference in the world for somebody else. Now, don't put stuff in there you wouldn't eat yourself, obviously. Half a bag of chips, probably not a good idea. But things that are sealed, like soups or boxes of pasta or anything like that, that's the kind of stuff that makes this program work. This idea isn't perfect. There are definitely people who have plenty of food and come in and just raid these things and steal the stuff. Same thing happens with little free libraries all the time. You have to just ignore it. You have to just keep doing what you can do, and hopefully karma will take over the situation. So just a note, just something to keep in the back of your mind. If you're food insecure and you're in real trouble and the food pantries are turning you away, check out littlefreepantries.org. And if you have excess food, absolutely check out littlefreepantry.org. Well, folks, thank you very much for listening to episode 280. Music, as always, is by Simon Wagg. If you'd like to get a hold of me, I am Jeff at builttogo.com. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And until next time, remember the words of George Santayana, who said, "There is nothing new in the world except the history you do not know."